us today for another official debate in the Arthuria server. Today we have Azgerod versus Footsoldier. The proposition is morality is not objective. Azgerod is taking the pro of that proposition, and Footsoldier is taking the opposition. When will be decided by concession. If there is no concession, then we'll leave it to a vote. And with that, the floor is yours.
Let me just say what I currently believe. So
Okay, go
Foot
for it.
Soldiers. So Foot Soldier is going to be trying to convince me essentially that morality is objective. My current stance is that while of course we all have individual beliefs about morality, just like we all have individual and sometimes conflicting beliefs about fact. With factual claims, we have sort of an objective standard that we can compare our beliefs to of evidence, and we can say with a degree of certainty that some factual claims are just objectively wrong and some are just objectively correct. I have not as of yet seen such an objective standard that we can measure our moral beliefs by. But I am willing to change my mind. But Soldier, go ahead.
Okay, cool. So, I guess I'll just run you through the universalizability principle then, from Immanuel Kant's perspective on this. So, when you want to empirically verify whether a moral claim is correct or false, what are you asking there? Do you need to verify empirically? Does there need to be is induction important, or can you verify it or falsify it in whatever way you like, as long as it's convincing? So for me, it doesn't really seem like empirically verifying it, like collecting a survey or something. That doesn't seem to be necessary for me in order to demonstrate that something is the case. It just seems that we need to demonstrate that something is the case in some convincing way. And I would say that convincing way would be the universalizability principle. So we would take something like theft, for example. If theft would be moral, then if everyone were to steal, then it wouldn't be problematic for everyone to be able to do it. Because for something to be moral, everyone should be able to do it. Otherwise, if it self-defeats when everyone does it, then that's not something that could be moral. That's not something that could be like a law of nature, like some moral law of nature, right? Because laws don't change or self-defeat. They don't change if you're in one room or the next room. They work just like gravity everywhere, and they don't self-defeat. Gravity doesn't self-defeat itself. You don't see objects just rising under certain weird conditions on the Earth. Like stuff doesn't just like float off into space the wrong direction that it would normally go. So if morality is something like a natural law, or is something which could possibly exist in a form that we actually think it could exist in, and it's not just complete nonsense, then it would be able to be universalized, because it would be universal. So it would have to be universalizable without contradiction. But when we try and universalize stealing, we'll get into a situation whereby if everyone was okay with stealing, it would no longer be theft. You can't steal anything if you're okay with it. It would just be acquisition or taking something. Like if I was okay with you taking my stuff, it's not stealing. So if everyone was okay with it, like stealing self-defeats, right? So that's the point, that there's certain things that just simply self-defeat. And so they couldn't possibly be moral, because if they were moral, you would be able to universalize them. So I don't think we need to rely on some sort of survey or some sort of empirical finding. We can use various other methods. We can use deduction, we can use falsification, and we can falsify the hypothesis that stealing is a moral good by demonstrating that it couldn't possibly be a moral good because it's not possible to be universalized. So that's how we can arrive at certain moral truths in that case, morality is certainly objective.
Okay, so as far as I know, what you just argued is that thievery could not be more like it could not be a moral law that thievery was good. That
Sure.
does not indicate to me that any moral law exists. You just said that this particular thing could not be a moral law if there was a moral law.
Right, and that's fine because I'm agnostic to the existence of like some sort of platonic orb of moral truth. Right, really, I don't really care if whatever this is has an ontology in that sense. So I don't really care if it's ontologically objective. I but what we can make a case for is it being somehow epistemologically objective. Um, I don't. I'm agnostic to the ontology of morality. It could come from God. It could come from a platonic orb of divine truth somewhere in a store cupboard in heaven. It could come from just our understanding. But at the end of the day, wherever it comes from, if what I'm going to argue is that if morality is something that we should take seriously at all, then it would have to be like as if it were a law of nature. So in this sense, I'm an instrumentalist when it comes to the ontology of morality. I don't really care about the
Mhm.
ontology of the morality. I can just be an instrumentalist and say if morality does exist as something which is um, as something which is coherent, then it would be objective because any other possible alternative would result in contradictions, and that couldn't possibly be the type of thing that I'm referring to or you're referring to when we talk about morality. So
Mhm.
you could say, so we can agree that if you do, if we want to agree that morality doesn't exist, then this is just a nonsense conversation, right? But if we both
Yeah.
agree that morality is something that is meaningful that we can talk about, then it quite certainly is objective. So would you say then that your moral system, did you describe it as subjectivism, or you have like your own personal axioms and this sort of thing, or what's the deal with that again?
Yeah, so essentially I take a few core assumptions to be the basis of my moral system. One of which is belief in logic, the other is a belief in empiricism, and the other is a belief in is a moral statement. And from these, I infer all of my other beliefs. And so I believe that the core moral assumption that I make is subjective, and anybody else could choose a different moral assumption, and we would be both as valid as the other.
Okay, let's take it step by step. When you say that you have axioms in place,
Mhm.
these axioms are assumed anyway just by the fact that we are communicating right now. Because if you denied logic, we wouldn't be able to converse, right? So it would be impossible to deny logic and have a meaningful conversation about anything anyway. So of course we don't deny logic because then my words would be meaningless otherwise. So I think that it's redundant to say that your moral system contains an axiom of accepting logic or something like this. It just
Mhm.
seems redundant to me. And
Okay.
I think the other one was something about like a similar redundancy. I can't remember
Okay.
exactly what it was,
Empiricism, yeah.
but
So
yeah, sure. Right. So yeah, if we
yeah.
were just like confused to the point of doubting the existence of our own hands, for example, then
Yeah.
there would be no way that we could have a meaningful conversation either. So I think
Mhm.
these two are just redundancies. I'm interested mostly, therefore, in your third one, which was your assumption of morality. What sort of form does that take then?
Like you want to know specifically what the moral axiom is?
Yeah, what axiom leads you to say, for example, that beheading children is bad?
Right. So I actually wouldn't make the statement that beheading children is bad. Like you can argue that this is really weird moral system, but that's okay. My moral system is essentially that I uh, should do that which serves my own values, and those values are kind of this like amorphous representation of the things that I've gotten through my childhood, the things that I value. Um, So I should do um, what serves my values, and then my values are like a list that I sort of figure out as I go along, kind of thing.
So, can you have a cognitive attitude towards moral propositions? Put another way, if I said murder is wrong as a proposition,
Hmm.
would you say that that has a true or falseness to it?
Yeah, so a certain kind of true or falseness. Like I wouldn't say that that is determinable in the sense that it is either good to, I'm sorry, can you repeat the proposition?
Yeah, so murder is wrong.
Yeah, yeah. So
Is
like,
that true or false?
yeah, so I wouldn't say that it is either good to murder or bad to murder. I would say that it is false to make the statement that it is good to murder because it is framed as an objective statement, and I do not believe that morality is objective.
Right. So the problem that I'm seeing now is you're sort of you're sort of arguing slightly ad hoc there. So you're starting with the conclusion that morality isn't objective, and then you're saying therefore the proposition couldn't be truth apt in a certain way, and you're sort of like saying they're false in an error theorist style way. You're saying that like for example, murder is wrong is like it's like just trivially false because it doesn't obtain to anything, or is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm just saying, like, it implies objective morality. I disagree with that premise, so I say that it's false. I'm not, I don't think it's ad hoc. Like, I don't think it's like some kind of circular reasoning or backwards thinking or something. Like, I think it's basically just working from within my own system.
Right, but if I say to you, is murder wrong? And you
Hmm.
say, no, because I don't believe morality is objective, that doesn't seem to be
Hmm.
you addressing the substance of the moral proposition. It seems to
Right.
be a
Yeah, yeah,
technical
true.
disregard for the proposition itself, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
It just,
so,
sorry, like, so it could just be like kind of like rephrased or something. Like, I just thought that's kind of what you were getting at or whatever. But if you just ask me, like, is it kind of like a theorem in your moral system? Is it justified in your moral system for you to believe that, like, that you shouldn't murder or something? Then I would say I would have a definite answer from within my own system. But if you just ask it like as a generality, then no, because I don't make statements about what other people should do. That's not something that's logically possible within my moral framework.
right, so this is what I'm going to push you on then, because
Hmm.
I feel like if it's not logically possible for you to assign truth aptness to obvious moral propositions like murder is wrong,
Hmm.
or you can't even answer that murder is wrong, despite the
Hmm.
fact murder is wrong is almost tautological
Hmm.
by definition, then I would just say that your moral system is just it either incoherent or just
Hmm.
impotent to the point of misfunction, right?
Okay.
It just doesn't work to convey the sort of morality that we talk about in society. Like when we talk about morality, like morality, I'm okay just to say that morality doesn't exist ontologically, and it's just an emergent property of culture or society. We can just say that it's culturally relative. We can um, in terms of um, like certain things that people uh, think within society that can't be expressed with the universalizability principle. Like the positive rights and stuff like this, we could say that's slightly culturally relative. We can say lots of things about morality, but if you're just gonna come up with something that says like you can't make a statement about murder is wrong
Hmm.
or not, then that just seems to be a failing of what we understand to be morality, right?
Okay.
So I'll go into a bit more detail because,
Okay.
for example, if if I talk about beating children, um, this is something which would wouldn't be totally objective. There's not necessarily a fact about the matter about beating children because if you wouldn't want to live in the world where all children are beaten and you are beaten as a child, if you wouldn't want to live in that world, then it would be morally wrong because it's sort of like a golden rule thing. It depends on the individual. Some people might want to be beaten as a child because they want to be beaten in terms of their discipline or something like that. So this part of morality, when it's not self-defeating, you could argue that that's not like an objective thing. But what I would say would be the parts of morality that I'm interested in calling objective would be murder, theft, rape, these sorts of things like burglary, all
Hmm.
of the things which we generally consider in society to be wrong
Hmm.
morally. That is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about like fringe issues because people would argue until they're blue in the face about the truth of is it moral to beat children at school, like use the cane on children at school. Some people think that the cane should be brought back. So that's not something we can say is even an objective moral thing that we can really talk about because it relies on the descriptivist component. But when we're talking about murder is wrong, it's just the case that murder is wrong because it's part of the definition. So it's like wrongful killing, right? So if you're going to just turn around and say the statement murder is wrong is false, then you've just gone wrong somewhere and you're mistaken. So I
Hmm.
would just urge you to reconsider your view of morality at that point.
Okay. So first of all, like with anything where the word itself is by definition a bad action, like if we define murder as killing somebody wrongfully, then okay, I would agree that like no one can ever logically say that murder is not wrong. But I would argue that that's not really a moral issue, it's more of a logical issue because we've already defined it as wrong. Morality to me is determining what kinds of killing would be wrongful. Um, but
Sure,
and
but it
another
seems that the logic,
Mhm.
the logical necessity of murder being wrong seems to conflict with your own understanding of morality. So that's where I'm pointing out there's a problem. Because if your morality doesn't lead you to think that murder's wrong, then you've got a hiccup in your system.
Mhm. So, like, again, if we define murder as like being wrong, then I agree that it is logically necessary for me to say that murder is wrong. So, like, um, but this isn't a question of morality to me. This isn't something that I would delegate to my moral system. Like, this is just something that I would delegate to my logical system of like anything which like any part of if we have something and part of its definition is this property, then of course this thing always has that property no matter what. But it's
Right.
just not a moral question.
Yeah, but if you concede that, then you've conceded the proposition in a way, because then we can just say that murder is wrong, that rape is wrong, that stealing is wrong, and everything
Hmm.
that would self-defeat would be wrong. So in that sense, you're conceding to an objective form of morality where
Hmm.
everything which has the linguistic component of victimness or victimhood is is wrong. So you've just automatically taken, like tacitly taken, an objectivist stance, right? By doing that. So by doing that, you're conceding the debate proposition.
Well, I'm not really though, like because like if you, I would never say that killing somebody is always wrong. I would just say that wrongfully killing somebody is always wrong, right? Just
Yeah, but
by the
this is entailed by
logical
the words.
form. Yeah,
Yeah,
but it
because the
has nothing to
words.
do with, it's not a moral question. Like, I feel like we're going around in circles here, but like, this is uh, definitely not convincing to me.
Or if you said, for example, is stealing wrong? And you said, well, stealing's always wrong because there's a logical problem for me not to say that stealing's wrong. Well,
No,
then
no, no,
you've
no, no.
just said,
That's not, wait, like, the specific logical problem is not like related to morality. It's like a very trivial tautological one where we say, like, okay, we assume X is wrong. Is X wrong? Well, yes. Okay, that is not a moral question. That is not like when we ask, is morality objective? We're asking, are certain actions like going to be just certainly uh, bad or certainly correct, regardless of what an individual thinks about them? We're kind of like talking about something that is not really relevant to the proposition. Like, I guess like you could make some language games about it, but it's not really what we're talking about.
Well, I would actually dispute that and say that's exactly what we're talking about, because when we've got like a proposition like murder is wrong, and you
Mhm,
say it's false, or
mhm,
we say like rape is wrong or something, and you say it's false to your system. Well,
mhm.
if you agree that it's tautologically true in in a logical regard, then what
Trivially.
one are you taking? Because it's you're now presented with a dilemma. Because if you say that it's logically the case that words such as rape, stealing, torture, murder,
Mhm.
all these things which have a victim implication or a badness inherent to the word or wrongfulness
Mhm.
inherent to the word, then you're just invoking some sort of
Okay.
pseudo Kantian understanding of objective morality. So, but
Okay.
if
Can I
you reject
clarify?
that, sure,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you cut out there for a second.
I'm just like accepting a pseudo Kantian account of morality, or you are you've got a logical problem between the words themselves and your moral system. So, what one is it?
Okay, so I just want to clarify, like my, if I was ever to agree that like morality is wrong, it would not be because of some kind of feeling about the word or something. It would be specifically because of a logical definition. I do not grant that murder is wrong, or that rape is wrong, or that theft is wrong, or any of these things, like in any objective sense. I would if in each of those is a little thing at the end, a little suffix at the end that says like is wrong, like killing that is wrong, unconsensual sex that is wrong. Um, it's not about the victimhood. It's not about the implication of victimhood. It's not about any other implication. It's only if it just states and is wrong. Like then, of course, I say yes, it's wrong, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the actions themselves. It's just about the definition.
I sort of see what you're saying, but murder is something which is understood to be wrong. So for you to say that murder isn't wrong, some people say that murder isn't wrong, right?
Mhm,
Then you can do that, but then that's just going against the sense of what is meant by that, because then it would just be killing. But to say that murder is not wrong
mhm.
is to somehow like go against the understanding of what it means to murder, right? So some people
Yeah.
might say, yeah, no, murder is actually okay. It's justified. Like I can kill one person to save 1,000. So murder is actually morally justified or morally correct in this sense. I would just
Mhm.
argue that it is not, because there's a discrepancy between the understanding of murder and 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 saying that it's morally good, right? It just there's a dissonance there, and I'll just point that dissonance out.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that this is a like an incredibly trivial argument. Like the larger argument that is usually had when we talk about whether or not morality is objective or subjective is not remotely what we're talking about here. Like what we're talking about here is like if we already assume that something is wrong, is it wrong? And if so, then you have to admit that it's objectively wrong. It's like, yeah, deductive logic does. Sorry, there's a lot of wind coming through at the moment.
Oh, sorry. Is it better now?
Yeah, yeah. Um, so anything that's like deductively logical, like X, which is wrong. Okay, sure. But that's just, again, like that's not remotely what we're talking about. I would argue, um, in many cases that like killing isn't always wrong. And depending on our definition of murder, I would say probably murder isn't always wrong. Usually, a lot of the ways that we use murder is more legal than moral. Like I would say that like uh, soldiers who you disagree with fighting in a war are not murderers because like murder has a legal definition usually. Um, but it's like I don't no I don't concede that anything is just straight up uh, objectively wrong or objectively right unless is wrong or is right is like in the definition. It's just a trivial argument for me to concede that.
let's change it then slightly. Let's say that
Hmm.
let's take the non-consensual sex one then, right? So if it's
Yes.
non-consensual, then that means that there's an element of victimhood in there because
Hmm.
there's someone in that equation who didn't consent and it happened anyway,
Yeah.
right? So that shows us that there is an element of wrongness. But what are you gonna now
I do
say
not concede
that
that.
right? So you're gonna say that unconsensual sex could be a moral good if you wanted it to be.
Or just neutral. Yeah.
Yeah, but let's say that you got great pleasure out of it, right? Then, like, and there was no consequences for you. So the utility for you was like better. It would be worse not to do it in terms of utility. Would that be morally good for you?
Um, for me, yeah, like in terms of how well it serves all of my values and etc. I would, if it like served all of my values in a positive way, then I would consider it um, to be good. But the argument isn't like, oh, if I concede that I personally believe that something is wrong, then I've conceded that morality is objective, obviously. Like
Well, that's
we're
sort of how
saying
it
that.
works. Our language shows us what is wrong and what isn't from the implication of the words. And
No, it
in
just shows us what
cases,
people feel about the things. It doesn't tell us what is like logically right or wrong. Just
well,
because people
it does.
think of
It
murder as
does.
wrong.
It points out that there's an element of victimhood or there's an element of unfairness or something there. Because, for example, we've got various words to refer to similar actions, right? So if I go into a room and take something, right, that's
Mhm.
taking something or acquiring something or picking something up. There's lots of different words to describe this action, but that the the word I couldn't use the word I stole something or um, theft occurred
Mhm.
unless there was an element of victimhood, right?
Sure. So first of all, I don't concede that victimhood implies wrong, but go ahead.
Okay, cool. So then what you're going to have to say is that you're now in the position where you're going to have to argue that words which imply victimhood and
Mhm.
potentially also wrongness, depending on perspective, can be morally good, right?
No,
So
or could be
so
morally neutral. Yeah. But I don't
there
have
would
to
have
argue that. You have to argue the opposite because you're taking the positive here.
no, I don't understand how you could possibly say that
Mhm.
rape would be morally good or theft would be morally good. It doesn't make
Well,
sense to me. It just
to be
seems it just seems wrong by definition.
Okay, well, if it's wrong by definition, if we're using a definition that includes is wrong, like logically, that is in the definition, then I agree, then that definition, the action must be wrong. And then we're making a trivial statement that has absolutely nothing to do with the question at hand, has nothing to do with moral questions or using a moral system to determine the goodness or badness of things. But that's not what we're saying. I do
Right.
not agree that victimhood, like, or rape or whatever, are objectively wrong. I believe that under certain moral systems, and popularly, they are considered wrong, but that doesn't mean they are objectively wrong.
Okay. So can you provide an example where it could be agreed upon, or people wouldn't think that you were just completely
Hmm.
batshit crazy for
Hmm.
saying that rape was morally good?
Okay, so I just want to really clarify here that I don't have to say that it's good. I just have to say that it's at least neutral, right?
No, you have to make a case for. Otherwise, you're saying that your moral system doesn't contain moral goods, which doesn't seem to be in line with what we consider morality to be about. We consider morality to be about good and bad,
Wait,
right?
if I don't
So,
consider, just because I can like all that you're saying is that it's objectively true that murder is bad. So in order for me to say that that's not true, all I have to do is show that it's not objectively morally bad, which includes neutrality or goodness.
um, well, it's either look. How could you say that an act it would be morally neutral? I can only consider
Hmm.
something to be amoral. I couldn't consider it to be morally neutral. There's it's
That's what
either
I mean.
true, yeah, but it's either true that something's morally bad, or it's false that something's morally bad. It
Well,
can't
that's true.
be a mixture of true and false, right?
No,
So the
that's true.
proposition murder is wrong is that either true or false. And I would
Yeah.
just reject any non-bivalent logic in there because
No, I agree.
they're not
I'm not. I'm just saying that the statement "murder is wrong," falsifying that could be done by saying that murder is amoral, or it could be done by saying that murder is good,
right.
not
And then
just
I would just
murder is
yeah,
good.
so yeah, fine. Well, I would just argue then
Yeah.
in that case that if you're going to say that something like murder is amoral,
hmm
then I would just say that your understanding of morality is at odds with the understanding that pretty much
Right.
everyone
So
has,
first of
right? So
all, just to be clear, we're not saying like what matters here is not my personal beliefs. What matters is that it is logically possible for a person to believe that murder was either more like amoral or good, right?
no,
And
that's not the goalpost because it's logically possible for me to believe that unicorns exist, right? That
yes.
I would just be mistaken. So I'm just saying that you're mistaken.
Oh,
If you
sorry.
think that if
Yeah,
you
yeah.
think yeah, if you think that murder
True,
is
true, true.
amoral, then you're just mistaken.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. True. So like all we need to show is that it is not objectively incorrect for someone to believe that murder is either amoral or good, right? I don't
Well,
have to like justify it within my own moral system. We just have to show that it's not objectively wrong to do that.
right. Well, we can just demonstrate this. We can even demonstrate with my first point that I brought up when I mentioned the universalizability principle, which is the theft one, like stealing. If you say that stealing, right, I'm going to claim that stealing is objectively wrong, and then you're going to come along and say no, stealing's amoral because I don't think you can claim that it's objectively wrong, and I'm not going to say that it's good. So I'm just going to say that stealing's amoral. Okay,
Like,
well,
or I'll just say that it's not objectively, or I'm just going to say it's not false, yeah, or that I don't see that it's false, that kind of thing.
yeah, but if we're using bivalent logic and you say that the proposition is false, then
No, no,
it either entails the negation or
yeah,
you're saying that it doesn't obtain, so it has no truth value. So you're saying it's either
sorry,
not truth app.
no, I can just say that I'm agnostic to it, right?
You could say that you're agnostic to it, but that
Yeah,
would just be like you saying you're just unclear, and
no,
it's not
no,
saying that it's
like right now, I'm in this argument, I'm taking the agnostic position, and you're taking a positive position. All I would be
no.
saying
But
is that
I'm
you have
asking
not
you
yet
about
demonstrated
I'm
that
asking you about
murder is wrong.
specific proposition. I'm asking you a specific
Yeah.
proposition. Like stealing is wrong, right?
hmm
I'm saying proposition stealing is wrong
Yeah.
is true, and you're saying you don't
I don't
agree.
know whether or not it's true yet. Yeah, you have not demonstrated that it's true. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so let's demonstrate it. If
Go ahead.
morality was a universal law of
hmm
nature, then it would have to be able to work universally. However, if everyone was okay with stealing, it would no longer be stealing, and
hmm
stealing would defeat itself.
Yep.
So we couldn't possibly have stealing
Yep.
as a morally good thing or something that could be permitted
Yep.
morally, because
hmm
if it was a law of nature, it was self
Yeah.
defeat.
I
So
don't
we can
grant
just
that it's a law of
deductively
nature.
prove.
No, I
So
don't. I deny one of the premises. I deny that there is any moral laws to be spoken of.
right, so if you do that, that's
hmm
fine. You can say that if you want. You can say that morality isn't a law of nature. Morality isn't universally applicable. It doesn't work like that. Well, then you've just got a different understanding of morality, and you're talking about something that I'm not talking about, or most people are not talking about when they refer to morality, right? Because people,
Mm.
when they refer to morality, they're talking about moral propositions such as murder is wrong, stealing is wrong. And if you come along and say, well, I'm agnostic to that, that's not morality for me, well, then people are just going to give you a weird expression and be like, well, what are you talking about? That's clearly everything we're
Well,
talking about
that's
with morality.
like with morality. I mean, I guess we can like when I talk about morality, I'm just talking about statements like should statements or ought statements, like
Yeah,
prescriptive statements of any kind, including I should not, it is wrong for me, it is good for me, it is morally neutral for me, etc. Like, this
Yeah,
does
sure.
not need to be applicable to all people. And I
Well,
don't
I'll just
consider it
say
a
that
law.
you're just mistaken, right? So morality is about
Mhm.
the wrongness and rightness of specific behavior, right? So
Mm.
if we're going to say that um, stealing stealing is wrong as the proposition, and you're just somehow confused or agnostic, or you don't agree that that's true or something like this, then and you say that for me morality concerns itself with um, what I like most or whatever other axiom that you have, then you're
hmm
just talking about something different to what the
Okay.
majority of people would be talking about when we use the word morality. You're talking about something, you're talking about morality and not morality, or like Zagog morality, or like some other type of morality. When we're talking
hmm
about morality normally, we have to be able to meaningfully discuss moral statements,
Okay.
moral
Okay.
propositions.
Okay. I'll concede this. So not the proposition mind, but I'll concede that I'll stop using my definition of morality because clearly I was thinking about it in a different way than you are. So morality then are statements like this is wrong for everybody, right? Or this is right for everybody, or this is amoral. Okay. So given that, um, I the thing about showing that theft is not a moral law does not um, show that, but maybe you will continue and do so.
Yeah, sure, man. So if I'm understanding what you're just saying there,
hmm
this is bad for everyone, or this is not bad for everything. If an action is morally wrong, then
hmm
it implies that it's wrong for everyone. It can't be right for
Yeah,
some
exactly.
people and wrong for someone else. Otherwise,
Disagree,
that
but
wouldn't
yeah.
make any sense. Like, who's it wrong for? Who's it right for? No, of course not. That's silly. It's like, gravity gravity does it apply to Bob? Does gravity apply to Fred? Of course it fucking applies, because if it didn't, they'll be able to
If
fly in the air,
yeah,
and
if you
that doesn't.
assume if you assume that morality is a law of nature like gravity is, and now I'm going to concede to you that when we say statements of X is bad for everyone, or like X is bad, we mean X is bad for everyone. Although that's not how my personal moral system works, I will concede that that's what we mean when we talk about morality. So go ahead.
But in that case, then what we're referring to by morality when we normally speak of it is
Mhm.
something other than what you're referring to when you speak of it. So either we need to
No,
get
I'm agreeing
inside
with
the
you.
same.
I'm
Uh,
agreeing with you. Like I'm saying that I will now operate under the assumption that when we say X is bad or X is good, we mean X is bad for everyone at all times and X is
yeah,
good for everyone at all times. I'm conceding
yeah,
that.
sure. Okay, okay. So you were just okay. I get it.
Yeah.
Right. So now, if you take that perspective,
hmm
then you are also sooner or later gonna have to see that morality would have to be something which functioned like a universal law, because if it
Yes.
didn't, then it doesn't work over here some of the time and work over there some of the time. It
I
works
I
everywhere
agree.
all the time.
I
Yeah,
agree.
so then if morality exists in a way that we're speaking about, then it exists like it would as like a law. And laws can't be self-contradictory. So
So I know.
if we if we make something universal, and if everyone stole, it would self-contradict itself. So that
Right.
can't possibly be morally good. So then we've just got an understanding of what is
hmm
morally good and what is morally bad. So we've got to objective morality.
Well, no. So first of all, the theft thing just shows that something isn't a moral law. Does not show that anything is a moral law, which is what we're trying to show, right? But furthermore, if I say theft is good, for example, and then I actually did somehow show that theft was good, or even we showed that that's impossible to say, like as you're saying, right? You said that it's impossible to say that theft is good. So it's either amoral or it's wrong. That is just a statement. Um, hmm. Okay, so yeah. So if I, so that would be, that's true for everybody. Anybody who said theft is, nobody could logically say that theft is good, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if to
By
say
that kind of, yeah.
yeah, and if you're going to say that it's amoral, then
hmm
you're going to have to say that propositions such as theft, rape, blah 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 are bad. Like they're
Well,
amoral.
So all statements, like when we say like all these statements are, well, first of all, I don't concede that like they would just necessarily be bad instead of amoral, but um, it's not like all statements that have like bad connotations like rape, murder, etc. It's specifically the ones that when universalized self-defeat, which might be good and bad things, right?
No, no. Something that's morally good can generally be universalized. There's not usually a problem with it,
Okay,
right?
so first of all, let's talk about the theft one. So we universalize theft, and then there's no sense of property, and then it self-defeats, right? That's the argument.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, I would argue that you would need to make a sociological argument before you said that the concept self-defeated, because I can imagine a world where people, because of the universal law being constantly in their brains, they remembered what theft meant. They maintained a concept of property, and they just considered that whatever I currently have in my possession is my property. I take things from other people's possession into my own at any time, and thus the concept of theft is maintained.
No, because that the difference is theft is only bad. You can only steal from me if I don't want you to take something. If I am okay with you taking something from me, then it's not theft. It's me giving you a present or
Oh,
allowing you to borrow my shit. So it's
oh, I
not
see.
theft. Yeah.
Okay. So the idea is that like in the definition of theft, in what people understand when they hear the law, like stealing is good, they think, okay, steal from someone wrongfully or something. And
Well,
so because you've
they
now
think
said that it's good, there's no such thing as stealing from somebody wrongfully because stealing is good. Is that the idea?
sort of, but it's like even if you don't have an element of wrongfulness in stealing, you're sitting there, you've got your stuff, someone comes in and takes your stuff. Then you're going to
Hmm.
be pissed. You're going to be unhappy, and you're going to be like, "No, give me my stuff back. I want my stuff back. You don't just take my stuff." And if you just like, I didn't care about that anyway, then you'd just be like, "Yeah, I left it out on the side of the road for someone to take." That's not theft. That's not stealing.
But that
That's
wouldn't
someone.
necessarily happen.
Well, it happens all the time. People leave stuff outside the front of the house. I don't know if
No,
they
that's
do
not
it
what I
in
mean.
America.
I mean that people wouldn't necessarily start viewing all theft as this like ambivalent thing. Am I misunderstanding what you're saying? Or
Well, if someone stole your car and
yeah.
um you like started celebrating, like then it's not really theft. It's like it's not really theft, right? Because
Well,
you wanted it to happen.
if our definition of theft is such that that's true, then yeah.
Yeah, because you wouldn't really say like if you just were hoping for someone to take your car and
Hmm.
someone took your car, we wouldn't say, "Oh, he stole my car." Like it would be like, "Yes, he took it." Like, do you know what I mean? Like it's not that's not what we refer to as theft. We don't go to the police and say, "Oh, my car was stolen," and like and you're unhappy about it and stuff like this. Because if someone stole your car, quote unquote, but you
Hmm.
celebrated,
Yeah, yeah.
it wouldn't be bad. It
I
would
get
be
you.
good for you, right? So
Sure, sure.
so the badness doesn't come just because we say that it's bad. The badness comes when when the action that you associate with theft occurs. You don't associate theft with joy, right? Part of what I understand theft to be is that I'm deprived. If you're not deprived of anything, no deprivation took place, then there was no theft. It's just
Okay.
sort of someone
It,
taking something that
again,
you
if
wanted them to take.
again, like if we define theft such that it cannot be like joyful for the victim, then sure. Yeah. And like that's totally reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah, so then let's think of a world where everyone took things
Hmm.
that were outside someone's house, right?
Yeah.
Um, and because it's not stealing because they put it outside the front of their house because they didn't really want it, right? But there was
Okay.
no sign there saying take it or something. They just put it outside the front of their house. Is is this gonna somehow make the verb taking self-destruct? Like, does it implode on itself? Does it annihilate the concept of acquisition if everyone takes stuff out the front of someone's house? No, of course it doesn't. People can
Hmm.
acquire as much stuff as they want. We acquire all the time. It's fine. But if everyone stole and was okay with stealing, then no one it annihilates itself, because if everyone was okay with the stealing, it wouldn't be stealing. It would just be giving or
Yeah.
exchanging, right? So then we can see that it doesn't work as universal law. And if morality works as universal law, then all we need to do is universalize it and see
Hmm.
what is objectively the case or not. So it is
Yeah.
objective. It's quite clear.
Mm. Right. So one issue that I would have is that your argument is dependent upon the attributions that we have, like that we give to our words. And if we were in a different culture and we had different associations with our words, then morality would be different, because we would
Uh,
have, like, let's say we had a word um, for killing, but it was like a good thing, and we had a word for stealing that was a good thing, and etc. Then the universality principle or universability principle or something, that would work backwards, and it would just go the other way, right? And we would just
uh,
believe
no,
that those things were
no,
good.
it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. And I can point out, right? So
Okay.
let's just walk through this together. So if we
Hmm.
imagine we swap the words, we swap
Yeah.
the word stealing and giving or something. So someone, or like swap the word stealing and taking, makes it less difficult
Sure.
to think of. So someone like runs into your room and takes your laptop and runs out, and you're pissed, and you cry because you spent a lot of money on it and you can't afford another one. And then there's another scenario where someone um, says, "Look, here's a book that I don't want anymore. You can have it. I want you to have it." And they steal it, because of you. We're using the word stealing now.
Yeah. Exactly.
And they steal the book, right? Despite the fact that the word stealing has negative connotations implied with it, and taking doesn't. In the first case, we can see that it was morally wrong. And if we universalized this action of running in and taking, running in and taking things which deprive people of something, then if everyone was okay with depriving people of stuff, then you
I,
wouldn't be deprived anymore. The deprivation isn't there. It's not the word stealing, it's the
I
deprivation.
don't grant that, like, so let's say like we had some word, like as you say, take, that had positive connotations. Um, I don't grant that people would view the action, that it's like objectively true that people would view the action as a bad thing anyway.
Well, it wouldn't. This is what I'm saying. It couldn't possibly have positive connotations for long if the act deprived people in like some way that invoked a sense of badness. Because
But I don't agree that, like, it's objectively true that everybody would like agree that that was a bad thing, or that people would start like, and it doesn't really matter what connotations the word will take eventually.
okay,
If the
I'll
you know what I mean?
just do it with you. I'll run it past past you directly, right? So
Hmm.
if I came into your house and took your laptop, and
Yeah.
you got home, I I I entered your house, I took your laptop graciously and walked
Yeah.
out respectfully, and shut the
Sure.
door behind me and made sure that everything else was okay. And you never knew who it was or saw me, and you got home and your laptop was missing. Would you feel good about that or bad about that?
Personally, I would feel bad about it.
Right. And why do you feel bad about that?
Well, like, well, my feelings are like kind of a descriptive statement rather than a moral statement, but like just because of my emotions and shit. Like,
Yeah,
but
exactly
like
right. So you
logically because it goes against like my values or whatever. Right?
right. And so this is bad for you because there's a sense of like deprivation, or there's a sense of that you've been fucked over, or
Hmm.
there's some
Like
badness
emotionally.
inherent to that action. Yeah, so let's say
It's not a
you
good logical argument, but like that is more emotionally what's going on.
let's now say that let's just pretend you've got a dog. You've got a big fuck off dog, and it takes
Mhm.
a huge fucking crap in the middle of your carpet, and
Yeah.
you've got to go to work. You don't have time to clear the shit up, so you're like, oh fuck. So you just like run out the house and go to work. You're late already, and you're like, I'll
Yeah.
deal with this shit when I get back. And I've secretly, in the middle of the day, snuck into your house by picking your lock, so I haven't damaged anything in entering. I've now taken the shit away and perfectly cleaned it behind me. And then I've left, put everything back to how it is, and then you get back and you see, what the fuck? The shit's gone. That's
Yeah.
great. I don't have to deal with it myself. Someone's
Mhm.
come in and taken my shit away. Let's just get rid of the idea that someone's been in your house and the weirdness of that. But you'd think, wow, yes, I don't have to. Someone's taken it away for me. That's great. Or you
Sure.
might think the dog has eaten it and cleaned it up. You might be a bit like, oh, that's a bit weird, but it's gone. Yay, I don't have to deal with it myself. And so you can see how it wouldn't be stealing. You wouldn't say that someone came in and stole my dog shit. You would never say that. You would say it like some like
But,
there was shit
but
in
you
the morning
would
and it was
because the
gone.
words but you would because the word steal in this case is supposed to mean something positive. But yeah,
Well, yeah, no, I've sort of forgot about switching words
whatever.
now,
Like
but
yeah,
yeah, but I just mean like in that case you would like be celebrating. You would be like, yes, that's great. I don't have to deal with it myself or pay money to get a
yeah.
cleaner in for me. Right. So the inherent in your understanding of the badness of the laptop theft is the deprivation, and that's what we're getting at when we're talking about theft. So it, if I come in and steal the dog turd, it's not really stealing anymore because you don't care about that. It's still something that I've broken into your house and robbed, but you don't care about it. You want it gone, so it's no longer stealing.
Okay.
So then we can say that the it's not just definitionally the case by the words that we use. There's an understanding, there's a feeling there of deprivation. I have been deprived of my laptop, or
Well, for
yay,
me
the dog shit is
personally,
gone.
there would be. For me personally, there would be, but it's not objectively like logically true that everyone would feel the same way. Maybe there's some people who
Right,
like just love getting their shit stolen.
right,
Yeah.
and this is the Wittgensteinian beetle in the box idea,
Hmm.
right? So for whatever stealing represents for you is wrong. I don't care what that actually entails, but what stealing means to you
Okay.
is objectively wrong. And what stealing means to me is objectively wrong. Because if you've got some horrible
Right.
possession that you want gone, but I think it's valuable for you, and I steal it from you,
Yeah. Yeah.
then you're not going to be deprived of something valuable. I might be mistaken thinking that I've stolen something and I'm depriving you of something. But actually you're not deprived of anything. You're celebrating that it's gone. Maybe it's an old rusty car that you want to claim on your insurance. And you say, "Oh yeah, it was stolen." But it's not really it's not stolen. You don't there's no deprivation there in terms of the act, right? So that's that so we can objectively say stealing is bad because in the cases where stealing isn't bad, it's not really stealing.
Right. So like the idea is that if we define stealing as being like taking stuff from people in such a way that the victim doesn't like it, and so then stealing is always bad for the victim, right?
Yeah, that's what stealing is, right? That's how we do define stealing. We define it as like depriving someone of shit, right? We don't say that
Sure.
stealing is taking something illegally or like necessarily.
Hmm.
Like we could
Sure.
define it as taking it illegally, but with saying illegal, we're just kicking
Hmm.
the can down the road of why it's wrong because it's wrong because it's illegal. Why is it illegal? Well, because it's wrong. Well, why actually is it wrong? Well, actually because the person is deprived of something, and that's what we care about, the deprivation of the in the act. So we can objectively say, therefore, that stealing's wrong because if you're not deprived and you don't care, then it's not theft.
Mm. Okay, I think that we don't really disagree. We're just disagreeing about how to talk about it, basically. Like, because again, like I agree, if you define something as bad, then it's bad. True, right? And that's essentially what you're saying, right?
No, I'm
We
not saying
define
that if we
stealing as bad, and then it's bad.
I'm not I'm not saying if we define it as bad, it's bad. I'm saying that the deprivation invokes a sense of badness, right? And I'm not saying that um, deprivation in itself is always bad. It's what we associate. It's like the beetle in the box. It might not be a beetle. It might be something else. But we're all referring to it. What I'm calling a beetle in my box might look like a worm to you if you looked inside my box. But you can't look inside my box. You just know I call it a beetle. Whatever's in
Hmm.
the box is irrelevant because we're all having a meaningful discussion about beetles. And what I think is a beetle, I think is a beetle. Or what you think is a beetle, you think is a beetle. But you don't get to look inside my box, and I don't get to look inside your box. We're just talking
Yeah,
about beetles, right?
but again, like,
And
but what you're arguing is that like a word and all the things it collectively represents are tautologically wrong because in the use of the word is this understanding that it's only ever used about things that some given person thinks is wrong. Now,
well,
one given
meaning is
use,
use.
sure,
Meaning
yeah,
is use.
yeah, sure, I agree. So like, let's say a given person is victimized by stealing in some weird way, right? Like someone cleans up their porch or something, and whatever they consider it theft or something, and most people wouldn't, but they do. Um, that is bad. The victim considers that bad, um, and calls it stealing. But the person but I guess the other people who are doing it just wouldn't call it stealing, right?
Well, if someone comes, like, I'll give the example. I think I know what you mean. I'll give an example to see if this clarifies that issue.
Mm,
So, if I have an old rusty shit car that I don't care about, and I'm just praying every day that someone quote unquote steals it, when
hmm
someone actually comes and steals it finally, and I claim on the insurance, I call that stealing to the insurance company. But inside, I'm actually celebrating. Like the person who stole it, quote unquote, thinks that he stole it. The
hmm
insurance company think that it's been stolen. But I know deep inside, me being the victim of the theft, that
Yeah,
it's not really stealing. I'm not deprived. He hasn't deprived me of it. I'm celebrating that it's gone. I wanted it gone. So it wasn't actually stealing. So what we
right.
could say is there was an objective fact of the matter that it that wasn't wrong, really, because it no theft took place, right?
Sure.
It was just an acquisition. The
Yeah.
the problem there is epistemic. There's an epistemic problem that everyone was deceived, right? So had they stolen, it would have been morally wrong. But they didn't steal actually, because it wasn't actually theft, but they were just deceived, right? So they would think that they were acting immorally. But had the man come out before the man arrived and waited there beside the car and then said, "Look, man, you want this car? I'm going to give you the keys. I don't want this fucking car. It's a present for you." Then that wouldn't have been a moral wrong. That would
hmm
have been maybe a good thing that he accepted the gift or something, and everyone was happy, right? So I think what's happening is there's a confusion between the epistemological understanding of wrongness by the victimizer and the objectivity of the action from the victim's perspective. So,
Sure.
from the victim's perspective, stealing is wrong.
Yeah.
From the perspective of someone who thinks that they're stealing is
Stealing
wrong.
is wrong.
It's
Yeah.
objectively wrong. But just
hmm
because someone's mistaken about something, like if there was
Or it
like,
has a different opinion. Like it doesn't matter. Like they just don't call it stealing, and to them it's not wrong. But anybody who would call it stealing would consider it wrong,
let's say
right?
let's say like I raped someone, and then I said I went to court and I said, oh no, I didn't rape them. I just it was just penetration, and um then the judge was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Okay,
Yeah.
you're going to prison. Like no one like the victim would say no, he raped me because this is
Yeah.
what it means to rape someone, and he did it, right? Um,
I think I understand what you're saying. Like
yeah,
I think I get the idea about why say that stealing is objectively wrong. Like I do get that. So
sure.
I just want to clarify whether or not that actually concedes me the proposition here about the meaning of what I mean when objectively, an objective moral statement. Like when I think about this, it feels kind of meaningless to me to say stealing is always wrong because anybody who is using the word stealing always considers it to be wrong. So no matter what the actual beliefs are, it is always wrong. So there you go. It
Oh
feels like
wait. It's not like I can just like sit there and say, oh, he stole from me, and then that makes it stealing. No, I'm saying if stealing occurs, whether I'm using the word stealing or not, maybe I use the word
yeah,
to denote stealing,
yeah,
and I just sit there and go, and whoever understands that would be able to understand my usage of the word. The meaning is the use that I'm engaging in there of trying to convey that I have been stolen from. Someone has deprived me of my possession against my will, right? Regardless of
mm-hmm.
whether it's called stealing or blah, 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 it doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
yeah.
And again, if I say, if I just sit there and pretend that someone stole from me when they haven't, I was like stealing, theft, thief, then I'm just lying, right? That's got nothing to do with the objectivity of stealing being wrong, right? That's just me lying.
I guess the point is that like if a person believes that something is stealing, then they necessarily believe that it is wrong, right? I guess that's the point. Like if they go by the definition of stealing that we're working with, which is that stealing is wrong, then anybody who believes that something is stealing necessarily believes that it's wrong.
Yeah, whatever that is, that
Yeah,
invokes the feeling that we refer to using the word stealing,
yeah,
that is wrong, right?
I understand,
It's
but
like, yeah.
literally all this is an argument by like that's the only thing here.
So
This is
you
all
cut
just a
out.
big roundabout way. Oh, sorry. So like as far as I can tell, this is just an argument from definition. Like I say that whatever word people use to represent the concept of wrongfully taking somebody's property, anytime somebody uses that word and believes that word is applicable, then they believe that they have been, wrongfully taken from, right?
Right.
And that's just a
So
definitional argument.
yeah, no, but it's not exactly, that's not exactly correct, because
Okay.
someone might use a word which doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily mean, that doesn't necessarily have wrongness in the description. So I'm not saying that it's like just tautological, right? I'm saying if someone doesn't have language, or they speak a different language and you can't understand them, right? So
Hmm.
let's say that someone speaks a different language, you can't understand what the hell they're saying, and they're just saying to you, and you can't understand what this is. Whatever they're experiencing in that moment is
Yeah.
a deprivation against their will, which they're not okay with, right?
Okay.
And that is objectively morally
Like,
wrong, because we know that, right? Because we can't universalize it, because
oh
that feeling, when universalized,
God.
self-destructs, it self-defeats. So it's not the word, it's not the definition, it's not the tautological nature, it's whatever that feeling is, that sense is, does not universalize. The beetle in the box does not universalize, whatever the beetle is.
I I have a hard time understanding the universalization idea because like it just seems to me that it's useful for saying this cannot be a law, X cannot be a law, but it doesn't seem to be demonstrating that like somebody's use of a word or some communication or their beliefs about something is um like objectively correct.
Right. So the feeling that someone has when they feel deprived,
Okay.
if you universalize that, so everyone was okay with that feeling, you said that
Okay.
this was morally good, that feeling was morally good,
Okay.
right? Then no one would have that feeling anymore because they would think that it was okay.
Well, no, that's not true. Like what people think about things and what people feel are totally separate. Like
The,
people could, like for example, like when I feel grief, I perceive that as a good thing. Most people perceive it as a bad thing. It's that doesn't mean that I don't feel grief.
yeah, but then it's not grief, right? Because if
That's
you see,
disagree.
no, look. If you see blue, right, and I see blue, we're both
No, I
seeing.
feel grief the same way that you do. It's just that I think about it differently. Or like maybe we don't, but like I don't think there's any reason um why I should feel it differently. I just think about it differently when it happens. I like cherish those particular feelings, right?
Yeah, wait. So maybe it's going to be easier to explain with colors. So if I look at blue and I say, look, that painting is blue, and you look at the painting and you say, yeah, it's blue. But then if I somehow enter your mind and attach my understanding to your optic nerve, and
Yes.
I look through your optic nerve and say, actually, no, what you're seeing through your eye is actually what I think is green. So
But
when you looked at
that's
that,
a false comparison. That's a false comparison because what I'm saying is that I do not believe that I experience grief differently than other people. Similarly, like you would look through it and say, "Oh, yeah, he is saying that that's blue." And you would like we would both see it as blue even when we connected our optical nerves. And yet, I would think of blue as like a really happy color and you would think of it as a melancholy.
um, yeah, it's a bit of a weird one because I don't think grief is immoral. I guess I think maybe I don't really
No,
know. I could
that's
argue that grief
that's
is
not the
necessary.
point. Like
Yeah, I
like
could say that
the
grief
point
is
is that
generally bad, but
we're talking about like the emotions that we feel when things happen. So like
yeah,
I feel grief or like what we think about something when something happens to us, when we feel a certain thing. I feel grief. I think this is kind of sick. I'm okay with this. Some other person feels grief. They think this sucks. This is horrible. Similarly, somebody steals from me, or deprives me of something, and I think like this is awesome. Somebody else thinks it's bad. That is possible, and I would still call it like deprivation. I would still feel the same deprivation that they do. It's just that I would think about it differently.
yeah, no, this is what I'm talking about with a beetle in a box, right? So if you talk about something as stealing as being awesome, you're just talking about something in you the language you're
Differently.
using doesn't correspond to my usage of the language. You have a
True.
different meaning.
Well, no, no,
You're
no. It's not
talking
that we
about
have a
something
different
else.
meaning. No, no, no. It's not that we have a different meaning or that we're talking. It's just that we have different opinions about the same thing.
No, no. Look,
Yeah.
I'll show you what's happening here. Right. So, going back to the man whose car is stolen, who's it's like a rusty old banger, and he wants it to be quote unquote stolen. Um, that's not really stealing. That's like cunning, cunningly orchestrating someone to take his shit away because he doesn't want it. It's like an old banger. He wants it gone. He doesn't want to pay for it to be scrapped or whatever situation he'd have to pay or something, and he can't claim on insurance. So he wants it to be stolen, quote unquote. But
Mhm.
that isn't really from his when it is finally quote unquote stolen. He celebrates. So that's
Yeah, but
not.
now we're doing a false comparison though, because what I'm saying is that with like we have two people who both experience the deprivation the same way. It's just that they think about them cognitively, intellectually, they think about them differently, right?
Right, and you're saying with
Whereas
the
in
grief
this,
example, you're saying
yeah,
the grief
exactly.
example, like when I feel grief, I celebrate. Where it's like the same thing as the man whose car is quote unquote stolen. When his
Well,
car is
no,
stolen, he celebrates. Well,
it's just about
no,
what I think about it, right?
yeah,
The
but yeah,
feeling that
yeah,
is the same is the grief, and then the difference is in how we react to it and how we think about it, right?
right. But like for someone, right, someone who enjoys being like slapped in sort of like
Hmm.
a sexual context or something, um, they're
Yeah, they both feel
experience
the pain. Yeah.
yeah, they're experiencing something which um, we might agree is quote unquote pain.
Hmm.
But actually, if that is part of an enjoyable experience, it's not
Hmm.
really what is meant by pain. Because if they
That's just
then
not
break their
true.
leg, if they then break their leg and say I feel pain,
Yeah.
that's not something erotic anymore. That's not erotic. There's something
Right.
different there's something different about being slapped and breaking your leg, right? When the slapping is erotic,
Yeah,
right?
again, if you define pain as unenjoyable, like then sure, you're right. But like
Well,
many
that's what
people
pain
feel a
is.
certain degree. Okay, but that's just not true. Like many people experience pain as just a particular emotion. Like if you pinch somebody, then it's like, okay, that's pain. That's that feeling. It's that nervous response. Now, if you like give them like an erotic like slap on the ass or something, then it's still pain, but it's just enjoyable pain.
Well, if it's enjoyable pain, it's not really what we're talking about when we're talking about
That's
pain.
again, we're
It's
just
like
running
a
around in
sensation.
circles with our definitions.
It's more like a sensation involved in
Well, you're
process.
saying that, you're claiming that, but many people would still call that pain.
Yeah, for like
Like,
shorthand, right? Shorthand. But it's like
no, like
if you actually
they
said,
still experience the pain. Like they experience
yeah,
the same thing. It's just the light.
no, if it's the liking it which changes what it is understood to be, right? Because you could get the same slap in a different context, right?
Hmm.
And it would be painful. So the understanding of the action is you're understanding something as painful or you're understanding something as pleasurable, right? It's the understanding. Like the man whose car is stolen, who's the old banger car, his understanding of that is that
Yeah.
it's great. He's not being deprived. So if there's no deprivation, there's no stealing. Like if you try to lie to someone, right, but you didn't
I
deceive them, you
the
haven't
thing is,
lied to them if you don't deceive them.
again, like I don't think we're gonna convince each other about this. So let's just skip along. We're going in circles here. But I just want to say, like the whole argument about when we say like theft is even if I grant you that like theft is always wrong, what I would say is that the various actions that make up stealing are not always wrong, and that those things are what that's what I mean when I say like morality is not objective. I mean that various actions such as stabbing somebody or like eating someone's fetus or some crazy shit are not objectively wrong. The words that we use might kind of like make them tautologically wrong, but the actions themselves are not objectively right or wrong ever. And that's
Um,
what I think most people mean when they talk about like objective versus subjective morality, the actions themselves.
you seem to be just asserting that now after we've got so far agreeing with all of the
Yeah, well,
things which contradict that statement.
I apologize for that, but that's now that I understand what you're saying, I understand like I do agree with what you're saying. It's just not related to what I mean.
Right. So, for example, if we take the example of stabbing someone, we can do it with any action that you bring up, which has
Hmm.
some moral truth aptness to it, right? So, certain things just aren't going to be truth apt, right? So, if you say to me, "Well, that's just not truth apt," but if you say to me, "Stabbing is wrong, morally wrong," then I'd say that is truth apt because if I went to a surgeon and he had to make an incision to do some medical procedure, it's a knife opening up a wound in my body. But
Hmm.
I'm not going to say I was stabbed. I wouldn't like go to the police and say I was stabbed.
I understand, but again, we're going to have the exact same argument, and I'm trying to move it on to a different point here, which is
But
like
this is the crux of you
that's the crux of
conceding the.
your argument, but it's just not what I mean when I talk about objective versus subjective morality. Like,
No, we need to understand this because then you're just utterly confused about what actions are, right? So the
no,
understanding
no,
of
you're
an
talking
action.
about you're talking about like a verb, like stab. You're talking about the word. I'm talking about the specific context, the specific action, the exact same configuration of molecules in the universe occurring from various different perspectives. Various different people can look at that and believe that it is right, wrong, morally neutral, and none of them would be objectively correct or incorrect. That is my
It,
statement, regardless of
if
what verbs we use.
if you think I'm literally just talking about verbs and saying that certain verbs are bad, I don't think you're understanding the implications of what I'm saying. Because what I'm saying, the
No.
verbs just denote what we feel, right? So we're
Okay.
not even talking about verbs. We're talking about what the verbs denote.
But
And
you keep bringing up the fact that we wouldn't call it X or we wouldn't call it Y, and that's I'm saying if we dispense with the idea of like using these words and we just talk specifically about what's actually happening, we just look at it from a physically objective position, then I think your argument falls apart.
no, it doesn't. I'm just using verbs so that
Hmm.
we can know what is being denoted, right? And
I
so
don't think that's true,
so
but
so
sure.
then we can put that into a proposition because we can't put molecules into a proposition.
I agree with you, but I just don't think that's true. I agree with you that we can't put like molecules into a proposition. We can't really communicate if. But if you keep saying things like, well, if the crux of your argument continues to be like, um, well, then we wouldn't call it X, then we're putting a little bit too much emphasis on what we're calling things and not about as enough emphasis on what is actually occurring. Because that's what I mean. I'm talking about judging what is actually occurring, not
Well,
through the lens of what we're calling them.
I'm talking about the same thing, right? So I'm talking
Hmm.
about what is occurring. So if
Okay.
I'm going to the doctor's and he makes an incision, what is
Yes.
occurring is not an act of malicious stabbing, right?
Okay.
Stabbing is not occurring, right? A
Okay.
surgery
We,
is
we don't
occurring.
we don't yeah, but we don't. Let's not talk about like whether or not a stabbing is occurring or a surgery is occurring. Let's just ask ourselves: is it wrong or right objectively, without talking about the verbs? So we have a surgeon making an incision into a person. I would argue that we would have various people who would look at that and disagree and have contradictory views about whether it was good, bad, or neutral, and that I contest that none of them would be objectively correct or incorrect.
So is what you're saying, if I understand correctly, we're gonna remove the understanding of an action and just look at the action in isolation and determine if the movement of the blade itself is immoral or not. And then people would
No,
be like,
like so
I don't know
my
what you're
point is
saying at
just
this point.
my point is just to remove any connotations from the words that were used, moral connotations from the words we're using. Like I just want to remove like because stabbing, as you say, has moral connotations. So we're kind of like begging the question if we use those words in this context when we're deciding whether or not something's objectively moral or subjectively moral, right?
Uh,
So I'm
uh,
just saying
yeah,
just use
okay.
non-morally tinged words such as the surgeon is making an incision. These are all amoral words, and we determine whether or not using those words, the action itself is morally, objectively wrong, right, etc.
Okay, I see what's happening. You're sort of getting triggered by the verbs. So all we have to do is just swap it out for A and B, right? So in A, an incision is made
Yeah.
as part of the surgery.
Hmm.
In action B, there's a man running down the street with a knife, and he
Hmm.
inserts the knife into the belly of a person and
Okay.
runs away.
Hmm.
So our understanding of A and understanding of B are different understandings of an action, whereas the
Hmm.
actual action itself is pretty much the same. In one, a knife is inserted into the
Yeah,
abdomen,
exactly.
and
Hmm.
in the other, a knife is inserted into the abdomen. We've
Hmm.
got two not identical, but two very similar situations of knife
Yes.
being inserted into the abdomen. But in
Hmm.
A, with the surgeon, we say, oh, well, that's probably good because he's gonna cure his disease or something. And in B,
Okay.
we say that's wrong because he was. We could use some other word instead of like stabbed. We could say he was attacked or he was all these things,
No,
and
that's the
we would.
point is that we don't use like yeah, like whatever. I mean, I don't want to get
But
too
it's
anal
the
about the verb
understanding.
thing, but
It's the understanding of the action,
yeah,
regardless of the
exactly.
word. We could
Exactly,
say,
exactly.
if me just describing this scenario to you, not using triggering words, like me just
Hmm.
describing a man runs down the street with a knife. He
Yeah.
inserts the knife into the abdomen of a
Yeah,
passerby and
exactly.
runs
We
on.
understand the circumstance surrounding it. That changes how we think about it, definitely.
Yeah, we understand that to be a stabbing, right?
Yeah,
So
but
we
let's
use
just
the word
not call it
stabbing,
that. Yeah. Like
but
my point
we use the
I
word
understand.
because that scenario is
I understand.
deemed bad. So we
I
apply the
understand.
word
But
because of the scenario.
I understand. But my point is that what I want what the thing that I actually believe, like I don't disagree with you that fine stabbing is bad, then stabbing is objectively bad. I agree with you there. My point is that if we remove verbiage from it and we just look at the circumstance, as you say, can you still make the argument that the circumstance is objectively morally good or bad? So go
Yeah,
ahead.
we can. This is what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that by by assigning the circumstance a word,
No,
such
don't.
no, look, you're not hearing what I'm saying. So
Okay, sorry.
I'm agreeing with you
Okay.
that stabbing has negative connotations,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm saying that when we hear about the circumstance, we use the word stabbing because we understand it as being bad, right? So if we use the word because we understand it being bad, it's like the stabbing, right, is objectively bad because we identify that situation as stabbing, and
Mm-hmm.
that is the bad thing. So the situation is the bad thing, so we use the word which denotes something bad, right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
we universally identify it as stabbing, right? And if someone came along and said that wasn't a stabbing,
Yeah.
they would be mistaken. It was a
Oh
stabbing.
no, they wouldn't be mistaken because as
They
you
would.
said, no, wait, because stabbing, as you said, implies badness, and this person doesn't necessarily believe that it's bad.
Right. So if someone ran down the street,
Yeah.
inserted a blade
Yes.
into someone's abdomen and
Yeah.
run along, and the police apprehended him,
Yeah.
and all of this happened, you wouldn't
Hmm.
describe that as a stabbing.
I don't think it's objectively incorrect to say that it's not a stabbing if, when we say stabbing, we imply moral wrongness.
That is
Because
for
I
all
don't believe
intents
that.
and purposes. That is for all intents and purposes just empirically false, right?
No, it's
People,
not. There's no empirical backing for something being wrong.
no, it's empirically false that scenario does not depict a stabbing. That perfectly depicts a
No,
stabbing.
I'm sorry that you're playing word games now because like we've established that inserting and stabbing are the same except that stabbing is defined as bad, right? We use the word stabbing when it's bad. Now a person can be here saying, I don't think that's bad. I think it's just an insertion. It's not empirically wrong because the only difference and no moral distinction can be made on the basis of fact or evidence.
So if you saw a newspaper headline saying "Man runs down London Bridge
Hmm.
and made an incision into the abdomen of multiple passers-by and was
Yeah,
then apprehended by police,"
yeah.
would you say that was correct usage of language in the way that we understand the English language to be?
Yeah, it might be a little kind of like autistic or something, but it's like it's fine. Yeah. It's
But
accurate. Yeah.
it's just not, it's not conveying what took place.
No, it is because it's accurate. It's just not placing a moral judgment upon it. Like an incision, like if you say someone came up with a big knife and inserted vigorously his knife into their abdomen several times, people know what happened. They might notice that's kind of weird that they didn't just call it a stabbing. But if we're
Exactly, that's
being,
my point.
yeah, yeah, no, that's not a good point because as we say, we're having a where we have said that like the difference between a stabbing and an incision is just that a stabbing is like bad. It's when we think something's bad, we call it a stabbing. If we think it's neutral or good, we call it an incision, right?
The
Like
situation corresponds to what is objectively considered bad, which is denoted by the word stabbing.
no, it's just like people use the word stabbing if they think something is bad. Therefore, a stabbing is objectively bad.
No, no. This is not what happens. We don't say, "Oh, well, was it bad or was it good?"
Hmm.
What, like, should we call it an incision, or should,
Hmm.
like, people don't think about it? They have a picture of an event in their
Okay,
mind,
that's okay, but now
and
we're confusing. Now we're confusing like our definition that we already agreed upon with the colloquial use of the word. Like we already agreed earlier that the difference between a stabbing and an incision is that a stabbing is bad and an incision is morally neutral or good. Now, if you want to like not use that
not no
definition and
no
use the
not
colloquial use, then we'll have a
not
different
not like
conversation.
I'm not saying that we need a definition which rigidly says, as part of the definition, that
Hmm.
it is bad or it is good. I'm saying people use the word stabbing to uh, to depict an event of a
Hmm.
circumstance as we have described, with the person running down the street with the knife,
Okay.
inserting the knife into the abdomen of passers-by, and then being apprehended by the police. That is what
Then
we
I would not grant that stabbing is bad. That stabbing implies badness.
right. Well,
Yeah.
the the problem with this is if if everyone was okay
Hmm.
with being stabbed, then we wouldn't have a distinction between stabbing and
Okay.
incision. It
So
would just be like,
stabbing being so stabbing being good cannot be like a moral law then by your like, yeah, it cannot be a moral law, sure.
exactly. So we've objectively reached that stabbing is bad, right? Independent of defining it tautological as being bad, right?
No,
It's
reached
not
that
got
it's
badness.
either
It's not
like,
got badness as part of the definition.
no, it could be neutral. It could be
If
amoral.
no, no, it
Yeah.
can't be amoral because then, well, you could argue that stabbing is amoral, but if you're going to start arguing that stabbing and murder and rape and these things are amoral, then you're just talking about something different than what is
No,
normally
we're not.
considered
No, we're not.
morality.
I could just say right now, I believe raping doesn't matter. It's chill. Like,
Yeah, so
what's the problem?
so
If you
if I
define
present,
raping as being something that's bad, then sure, that doesn't make sense. But as long as we leave it
yeah, no,
open,
I don't need to do that. I don't need to define it
yeah,
as something bad, right?
yeah,
I'm not doing that, right? So
okay,
when I'm showing you that it doesn't universalize based upon the circumstance, the feeling that someone has. Not not saying that it's bad. I'm not saying rape bad. I'm saying if you universalize it, it self defeats, right?
so
And
that means it's not good, right? That means it can't be good, but it could
it
be
means
neutral.
it can't be a universal law, a moral law of nature, because universal
That's okay.
laws of nature don't contradict each other.
I understand that, but that doesn't mean that it's not morally neutral. That doesn't mean that it's not amoral. It can be moral. It
Okay,
can
yeah,
be
no, yeah,
amoral and not be a law of nature.
that's a separate argument. So what you're saying now is that okay, well I agree with, in theory, everything you've said about objective morality I agree with. However, I'm just going to say that all moral propositions are amoral. So you're going to do some error theorist
No,
thing.
no. Like what I'm saying is that what you mean when you say some like things are objectively moral, and what you are referring to is the words that are being used rather than the actions that they represent. Even though
No, no,
like
we've gone over this. We're literally
I
talking about the actions.
no, but
We're not
we're
talking
not
about the
though.
words.
Like again, but you
I
keep going
even
back to
said A and
stabbing.
B. Yeah,
But
but
but you keep
I
going back
even
to
said
stabbing.
I even said A and B for you. I've
But
even
that
made
doesn't
like
help though.
noises and all sorts. Right?
I know,
It's
but that
not.
doesn't help. My
It's not.
point is not which words are being used. Your argument hinges upon the words having connotations of morality. And if we use words that do not have any connotation of morality, such as incision, then your argument falls apart. And you keep going back to calling it stabbing, which does have that moral connotation to begin with.
No. Look, what you're doing is you're doing a bit of a weird sleight of hand here, right? So what's happening here is I'm saying, yeah, we can say that certain words have negative connotations, but what
Hmm.
I'm saying, in terms of the objective morality bit, is that we experience the circumstance, the state of affairs is experienced, and then we judge this state of affairs. Either we judge it to be an incision, or we judge it to be stabbing, but it's
Hmm.
based upon our understanding of the morality of the situation. Because
Yeah.
if we didn't understand it to be immoral,
Hmm.
then we wouldn't use the word stabbing
Yeah.
at the
Well,
doctors.
so first of all, I disagree. I disagree. Here's the thing. When if you're saying that no person would call something stabbing if they thought it was good, is that what you're saying? You wouldn't call it stabbing if you thought it was good or neutral. Is that what you're saying?
I,
You would call it an
I'm saying
incision.
I'm saying that it would be the incorrect usage of the word, or maybe let's say that maybe they were just using the word in a weird way, and then I'd say, "Oh, can you clarify what you mean? You went to the doctors and you were stabbed?"
Mhm.
And then he
Yeah,
might
yeah,
say,
yeah.
"Yeah, I was actually at the doctor's, and I thought I was just having keyhole surgery." And he came out with this knife and he was stabbing me, and I was like,
Okay.
I fucking ran out there or something. Like I don't know, like the
So
situation, but you know what I mean, like.
So then you take a person who is you're confusing the colloquial version again and this technical version that we've come up with, because it's not true factually that a person who thinks that stabbing is good would not still call it stabbing. You would still call it stabbing because that's the colloquial use of it. As you say, it matches the circumstance. Someone comes down the street, hacks somebody with a knife, that's a stabbing, regardless of whether or not you think it's good or bad. But
Or
if we're
the word
using
that you just used there as well, hack, for example.
yeah,
If
yeah,
you
yeah.
said an
Yeah, I
incision,
understand. Wait,
if
please,
you,
please, please. Wait.
yeah,
So, like, but if the person did not agree, if somebody was using our more technical definition, where you saying that it would be wrong for stabbing if they didn't think it was, then someone who didn't think it was bad would not call it stabbing, and we'd be fine. Your argument would not hold.
or wait. So all you're doing is you're saying, so if someone said that it was an incision, they deemed it
Yeah.
morally wrong, but they said that it was an incision.
No. They deem it morally good, so they call it an incision. Because as you've said, if they deem it good to stab someone, they wouldn't call it a. They
Right.
call it an
So
incision. Yeah.
yeah, all we need to do is just ask the victim, was it a stabbing or was it an incision? And they will say it was a fucking stabbing, you moron, right? And then
What does
then
their
we have
opinion
our
have
answer,
to do with anything?
because that is the action. That's part of the action. Like it doesn't
Yeah,
it
but
doesn't matter the
what you
movement of the
call
knife.
no, what you call the action, like you're using the fact that it has immoral connotation to justify the idea that it is immoral. But the thing is that different
No,
people
no,
would
no, no,
call.
no, no. You're not understanding what's happening. It's
Okay,
annoying, and we're going around in circles because you're not understanding what's happening.
I
You're
think I am,
saying
but
you're saying that the word stabbing is the thing
yeah,
that deems it immoral. No, it is deemed immoral. So the word stabbing is used, right? It could be the
I know
word
that's your
blah, blah, blah,
argument.
blah,
I know that's
right?
your argument, but the thing is that not
It could
everyone
be
deems
anything
it
else.
immoral. So not like
Yeah.
you're saying,
So
like
if someone
this is
came
a
along,
circular argument.
it's
Like
not. If
no, it
someone
is.
came,
I wish I had the organization in my mind to point it out, but like the point is that what somebody if somebody comes along and does not believe that it's bad, then by our stricter definition, they would call it an incision. By the colloquial definition, they would call it a stabbing. You're saying by the colloquial definition, they would still call it a stabbing. Therefore, it is wrong because when we say stabbing, we mean that it's wrong. But now we're switching to our more precise definition of stabbing. And if we
uh,
were already using our definition of stabbing to start with, the person would not have called it a stabbing in the first place, but an incision.
okay, I think you're getting confused with verbs. Let's go back to A and B to make this really clear. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So in A, someone goes down the street and inserts a knife into the abdomen and runs off.
Yeah.
In B, someone is in the doctor's surgery and an incision is made in the abdomen as part of a medical procedure.
Mm-hmm.
Person, the person who's laying in the doctor's room would use the sense of B, the doctor's surgery sense. They would use the sense of B if the procedure was deemed to them to be a
Mm-hmm.
normal procedure, right, or something like this. And
Mm-hmm.
if if they thought that the doctor was particularly violent or
Yeah.
obnoxious in the way that they were treated, they might use the sense of A. They might say, "Look, I was in the doctor's and I was sense A inserted a knife into my abdomen," right? So, and in the street one, if you ask the person, what was it, sense A or sense B, then they would say no. It was the um I forgot which way around it A or B was, but the street one. It was the street one, right? And if you said to them, "Oh, but are you sure it wasn't B, like the doctor's surgery one?" And they would be like, "No, it was definitely A. It was the street one, right?"
Okay.
It would be very bizarre for them to say, "No, it was the doctor's surgery one. It
Yeah,
was
of
it was
course.
B." right?
Yeah,
So
because like now the words take on the entire context and have nothing to do with morality, right? Yeah, they don't necessarily have anything to do with morality. Someone would still call the street circumstance the street circumstance, even if they thought it was a good thing.
no, if the street circumstance is
Mhm.
something which people understand to be morally bad, right?
Some of them
That's
do.
what. So you're saying that someone.
Yeah, of course,
Let,
that's like the whole
okay,
point of non-objective morality. There are some people who disagree with like popular statements. Yeah.
right. So what you're saying then is that someone could say that the street scenario happened
Hmm.
to them, yet
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
describe it. They actually thought that it was somehow good, and they described it
Or
in the doctor's surgery sense.
no,
What is
no,
that?
no. They wouldn't describe it in the doctor's surgery sense. I don't care how they describe it, but they would think that it was a good thing. And the or somebody who's observing it might look at it and they wouldn't call it the doctor's sense because of course it's a different circumstance and the A and B are only representative of the circumstances themselves and don't have any moral. So they would call it accurately if it's getting stabbed in the street, they would call it getting stabbed in the street sense, but they still might consider it to be a good thing.
Right. Well, what's happening here is you're saying that then the action, um, right, because the understanding of the action
Hmm.
is the sense in which you understand it in the sense you understand it, right? So the street sense, it's understood to be something like uh with a victim, right? Whereas the doctor surgery sense is understood
Maybe I
to
don't even
be,
grant that. If you're saying that the victim thing has anything to do with morality, then no, I don't grant that.
but
Like
it
there's
doesn't
somebody who could view it as like, oh, it's not a victim.
view it as what? Sorry.
Like they could somebody could observe that and consider it not a victimhood, but like they're being blessed by the gods or something.
Right. And if they view it like that,
Yeah.
right, then
Then they
it's
wouldn't
not.
call it a stabbing. They wouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
the statement stabbing is
Uh,
morally wrong
yeah, but again, this is
isn't
the point. I
challenged.
don't
It's not
care.
challenged. You
That's
haven't
fine.
challenged the proposition.
No, like my point is like this the to me like if you're really hard set on the proposition being you cannot make a statement X is wrong and be more objectively correct, then yes, I will concede that proposition. But that's not what I intended, and that's not what is when we talk about objective versus subjective morality. Usually what we're talking about is when we look at the actions themselves, we don't talk about the words that are used. We don't say stabbing in general is objectively right or wrong. We say this particular like configuration of molecules. We're talking about the configuration of molecules and we say this circumstance is objectively like right or wrong. Can we actually make that statement and be like correct?
Well, what you're
That's what we're
saying
talking about.
seems to be you're cutting out a bit for me. I don't know if it's my connection or yours
Oh,
because I'm
sorry.
walking down the street, but
Hmm.
I think I'm hearing what you're saying, and it seems to be what I brought up earlier that you're now starting to say something like the movement of a knife can be objectively wrong, or should be able to be.
No,
We
because
should
it
be able
still
to
holds.
classify.
No, 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 no. I'm saying we have the entire. We can have the unit if we like. The point is just that we do not use words that are morally tinged, so that you can't use that to say therefore everybody who calls be uh, consider it bad. Therefore, the word itself is morally right or wrong. Right? I'm talking about the circumstance and the actions themselves. Right?
Um, yeah, look, I think we're talking past each other here because um, you seem to be going backwards and forwards on the meaning of what we're referring to as moral acts, right? On one hand, you seem to be saying something about molecules, and that I understand that to be mean something like the movement of a knife,
Okay.
which
Well,
I
that's
just
not what
think,
I mean.
yeah, well, that
So
just seems ridiculous. So let's take that off the table. Um,
that's not what I
the
mean. When I talk about the molecules, I mean the entire circumstance itself, as much information as you need about this, except that we're not assuming moral connotations with the words we're using. That's all I'm saying.
Sure, but I'm not doing that anyway, right? So you seem to be
But
just
you are. You keep
you
talking
seem
about like.
to be consistently just missing a step in the puzzle, right?
But
And
I'm
it's
not. I've agreed. Yes, sure. People view the circumstance itself as bad, so they use the word stabbing rather than incision. I understand that. I've
yeah,
addressed that.
yeah, and what they're saying is stabbing. We can have a proposition to say stabbing is morally wrong,
And I
and
grant you that.
right. So you grant that we can make objective moral propositions, right? But what you're
Of
not
that form,
granting,
yeah.
yeah, right. So that is basically, I think I pretty much like with that. I don't even
hmm
think I need to say anything more. I think that is
hmm Okay.
you've just
I just
conceded
want to.
to my
Yeah.
position.
So I do not believe that I have conceded. I have conceded something, and yes, it is entirely reasonable to view the proposition as being that, right? It's entirely reasonable. If you can say like X is just objectively wrong, X is objectively bad, it's totally reasonable to view that as like, okay, you believe in objective, sure. But
That
that's
is what is meant by the
mhm.
negation of the proposition, right? So that is
I understand, but that's
what
just
we're
not.
debating, and you've just conceded to my argument.
No, like I've conceded to one of your. I've conceded to. I just do not believe that that conclusion is actually a negation of. Um, again, there's ambiguity in the language. The conclusion that you and I have both reached is actually a valid negation of the. Because again, what I mean is there an objective statement that could be made about the sword itself, not about like using a particular verb, stabbing, and then making the argument that stabbing is always wrong, but rather saying this particular circumstance is always wrong, is objectively wrong or objectively right. That's what I mean when I talk about like, do we have objective or subjective morality?
Okay, I understand what you're saying now, right? So
Oh, good, thank God.
yeah, no. So what's happened is what you're saying is essentially trivial, and I'm going to debunk it hopefully quite quickly.
Okay.
And once I've done that, you would have conceded my position. So the reason why I think this is trivial to debunk is what you're doing is you're presupposing you're presupposing materialism, right? Because what you're doing is saying that the world and morality aren't just things which we perceive and we can talk about our perceptions of, and we can say that our perceptions of certain circumstances are morally bad or morally good, certain circumstances were good or bad. No, you're saying that there is a fact of the matter in the world of morality that's ontologically objectively true, and
Well, no,
so that presupposes materialism, it presupposes moral realism, and I don't even need to do
no,
that
I'm
to
not.
be a moral
That's not what I'm
objectivist.
saying. That's not what I'm
Yeah, but
saying. Like,
no, but that's
I
implied
no.
by what you're saying, because otherwise what you're saying is just nonsense. You're chatting shit if that's not what you mean. You can't possibly mean anything else.
What so let me think. So what I'm saying is not that there needs to like literally physically exist a moral law, or like in order for you to be saying what you're saying. Like I understand that that's more of a
Not the
statement
moral
than.
law, not necessarily a moral law, but you're saying we have to be able to attribute
Mhm.
the moral judgments to the world in itself. Das Ding an sich is the Kantian way of saying it. Like not our perceptions of the situations, but the situations themselves in the material structure of the world. There is a truth about the moral goodness or badness of
I don't,
the
I'm not
incision of the
100%
knife.
sure. I'm not
Right. So
100% sure about that. Like because like
yeah.
because I think that you can make statements like it's objectively true that the sun like exists up in the solar system or whatever, like, and we rotate around it. But
Right.
I do
Yeah. But
not.
I perceive the sun. Right. So I look up and I perceive the sun.
Yeah,
So
but
I
I'm
can
not
point to the sun.
saying. But I don't
I
think that
could.
it's like I don't think that the all this empiricism and logic gets us to the justified belief that the sun exists in the solar system. I don't believe that all those things are like codified in some physical law that exists in the world or some Like,
Look, I can look at
mm,
my hands and I can say, look, these are hands. I have hands. My hands exist.
mhm,
I don't care whether materialism is true or not. I don't care if Berkeley was right or whoever was right. I don't care about any of that. I'm agnostic to materialism. I don't have to
mhm,
have a position on that. But I look down at my hands and I say my hands exist because I perceive my hands. It's not because my
okay,
hands that there is some existence which is beyond my perception. No, I perceive my hands and I can say that in my perception of reality, my hands exist. And
mhm,
when someone on the street um, has the knife thrust into their chest, they're perceiving the circumstance, the state of affairs are perceived. It's not like there's some state of affairs independent from the perception which is being judged. No, the judging is of the perception of having a knife thrust into your abdomen on the street. And so the moral goodness and moral badness is contingent on our perception of things. For you to say that
yes,
no, it's not our perception of things that matters. It's objectively the state of affairs in the world, independent from our perception. The molecules, the movement of the knife into the body, and all of the facts independent of the perception of the person perceiving it. That's just presupposing materialism and presupposing something
well,
which
I'm
you
not.
aren't going to be able to defend.
I mean, to be clear, I'm not saying that there is a like an objective existence um for like moral truths. That's what you're defending. No, I'm saying the opposite, right?
I'm not defending for one moment that there exists in the
Hmm.
world some ontology of a moral fact. I'm saying that we
Uh,
perceive moral things and we can talk objectively about what is morally right, morally wrong, based upon our perception of the world. Because to say otherwise, that there exists moral truths beyond our perception, is to say that materialism is true and moral realism is true, which is not even my position in the first place. And I think that's silly.
okay. So, man, I'm trying to understand like what exactly you're trying, or your problem in your proposition, like just that. Can you restate it? Like I'm confused.
Can I restate what I'm arguing
Like,
for?
yeah, like precisely. Now that we've had this little clarifying bit, like what is it exactly that you're arguing for?
I'm saying
Because I think we may
that,
have a misunderstanding or something.
yeah, at the start of the discussion or the debate, we were clarifying how morality is something which we can talk about and that we understand. And I'm agnostic to whether this thing has an ontology in the world as some um, some orb floating about of moral truth. I'm agnostic to that. I don't care whether that's the case or not. I actually think that's quite hard to justify some
Yeah.
platonic sense of morality. I'm not going to argue for that. That's not my position. My position is just we perceive things to be morally right and morally wrong, but we can not only perceive things subjectively to be morally right, morally wrong. No, it's objective. We can say
What's the difference then?
objectively that certain
Like,
things
like what
are
do you even
morally
mean when
right
you
and
say
morally wrong.
so what do you actually mean when you say like the difference between subjectively and objectively considering something to be right or wrong?
Well, I think that to say something is subjectively morally correct means that
Hmm.
means that the proposition obtains to your own personal preference, and that doesn't seem to make any sense at all because it wouldn't be consistent. It would change. It wouldn't be like a universal law at all. So that is not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about morality. When I'm discussing with someone, oh, is it wrong to murder or is it wrong to rape someone or something like this? Like, I'm not interested in whether they think that is right today and wrong tomorrow. I'm interested in whether it's objectively wrong or right, whether we should actually do that or not, whether that behavior is allowable or not, right? So if they're going to say, oh, well, my opinion on that might change from day to day or this and that, that doesn't sound like they're talking about morality. That just sounds like they're talking about their preferences. and that's not something that I'm interested in. That's not something that the legal system would be interested in either. Like to say what is right and wrong or permissible in society.
The,
Like
the legal
judges won't be
system
like,
works
oh,
upon a democratic system where everybody just like says what they like and what they believe, and we synthesize that. Right? It's not like based on some objective morality.
no, it is based upon some objective morality. There's a lot of people are highly influenced in the formation of the legal system and governments by Kantian philosophy and objective morality, right? Like
Being
pretty much most of the
being
figures.
being like affected or influenced by someone's theory of objective morality does not mean that like your beliefs are objective morality.
Well, I've made a case in this discussion for how we arrive at an objective model of morality. You might disagree with that, right? But if you disagree with that, I just think that you're not talking about morality at that point.
But the thing
But when you
is that
start
like
saying that when you start saying things like the proposition that rape is morally wrong is just not a moral statement. It's just amoral, and things like this. You're just talking about something other than what I'm talking about when I'm talking about morality, if that's the case. Because of course that's a moral statement. Everyone knows that that's a moral statement, and that's what we mean when we're talking about morality.
yeah,
For you to
but
say, "Oh
most
no, that's
people
amoral,"
most people when they hear like rape is wrong or something, I think they mostly think about the circumstance that it represents itself. They don't assume that it has baked into it an assumption that it is wrong. Like
sure, and they
most
think
people,
about the circumstance and they see it as being wrong. And when they
some
think
do,
about a
some
circumstance,
don't. There's a lot of cultures where people don't consider, and if you assume that it includes, then you're begging the question.
no, look, it's not begging the question to say that part of what I understand, part of what I understand rape to be is that it is undesirable, or there's
When
victimhood, or there's
when the
that's my
when the
understanding.
question
That's my understanding of it.
when the subject in question, the dilemma in question is objective, my understanding and the way that I'm going to discussion is that it's just defined as wrong. Yes, that is begging the question, definitely.
No, no, look, I think we're going around in circles. I think we should put it
Well,
to a
yeah,
vote soon because it's
yeah, that's
starting to
probably
get
true.
tedious. Because
Yeah, that's
what
probably
I am
true.
saying here is not that rape is wrong, therefore it's wrong, and like something like that. I think I've made a case many times in this discussion now that
Mm-hmm.
people assign words to states of affairs such as rape when
Okay.
that circumstance is deemed wrong, and if it wasn't deemed wrong, it wouldn't be understood to be rape or to be stealing, right? So if that's the case, we can just know that stealing is wrong because otherwise it wouldn't be understood to be stealing or rape or these other horrible things, right? So it's our language reveals to us just what is commonly understood, but we can just verify that using the universalizability principle, which I've demonstrated in this conversation. And that's my closing statement, I guess, would be as I've demonstrated, morality can be objective, but not only can it be objective, if we don't view it as being objective in this way, then it just doesn't make any sense. It's inconsistent. It could be self-contradictory. And what I'm talking about, and what most people are talking about when they're discussing morality, is that something, an action, is right or it's wrong, and it doesn't just change upon what room you're in or what the weather's like outside. No, rape and murder, theft are always wrong. If you deem them wrong, they're objectively wrong, and they don't randomly become right. Um, that is what we're talking about when we say something is morally wrong. That's what we mean when we talk about morality. And if you're going to say stuff like, oh, well, rape is amoral, well, then you're just saying something other than what is commonly understood when we discuss morality. So that's my closing statement, I guess. I'll give you the floor, man, and then we should put it to a vote.
Agreed. Um, so I believe what Footsoldier has shown is that when you take a circumstance such as stopping somebody on the street, various people who are involved in this interaction who hear about it, including the victim, will call it a particular word, something like stabbing, as opposed to incision. And because they call it stabbing colloquially, then we say, okay, well, my intuitive understanding of the word stabbing is that it is immoral. Therefore, anytime somebody calls something stabbing, it is immoral, and therefore stabbing is objectively immoral. I would argue that this is begging the question. Your conclusion is in the definition of the thing that we're talking about. And that was pretty much the only argument that was presented, and I did not find it convincing.
Great.
nice.
Thanks you two for debating. I thought it was a great debate.